Hello and welcome to the EDM Podcast episode 71. I'm Sam Matler, your host, and if you're new to the show, this is a talk show, podcast, interview series, whatever you want to call it, where I interview successful producers, engineers, and interesting people in the music industry. Today's episode is with Slynk, that is S-L-Y-N-K. He's a producer originally from Australia, now lives in Canada, and he makes funk music, a bunch of different stuff. And we have a fascinating conversation. We talk about how to get that funky or groovy sound in your music, and the answer that he gives to that is one that you're probably not going to like because it's not there's no quick hack, actually. We talk about creative block and why he thinks it doesn't exist. We talk about Ableton techniques and tactics, the mistakes that new producers make, and the purpose of mastering, and Slynk's opinion on that. We also talk about music theory and why that's important. So it's a great interview, very production focused. Make sure you have a listen. Make sure you try some of the things out that we talk about. And if you do enjoy the episode, please leave a rating and review on iTunes. You can do that at edmprod.com/iTunes. Finally, if you want show notes and takeaways and more details for this episode, head on over to edmprod.com/71. That is edmprod.com/71. We post each episode as a blog post with takeaways and extra stuff and other links. So make sure to check that out. Anyway, without further ado, here is Slynk. This episode is brought to you by EDM Foundations. EDM Foundations is my course for new producers, those who've been producing for under 12 months, or even those who've just started. The whole idea of the EDM Foundations course is that you learn the fundamentals of music production by actually doing and not just learning the theoretical stuff. The course consists of over 12 hours worth of streamable video, where I walk you through the creation of 3 songs and give you advice and tips for working on your own original alongside them. We've had over 500 people sign up for this course. Many of them have had great results. If you want to learn more about the course, head over to edmfoundations.com. Welcome back to the EDM Podcast. Today I'm joined by Evan, better known as Slynk. Evan, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good, man. Have a good weekend?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Now, a lot of producers struggle to make their music funky or groovy. And it's something that stands out in your music. It's kind of like this laid back, human, not super rigid sound. What tips would you give to people who struggle with that? Or what do you do to achieve that kind of sound?
I'm not really sure. I honestly just listen to tons and tons of funk music. And I think it's just like subconsciously in my brain when I'm writing music, because that's all I listen to at home is funk music. There's this awesome radio station called We Funk Radio, and they just play weird funk music nonstop. All kinds of genres within funk, like you got disco and all that. And yeah, I just like listen to funk music, and I kind of just instinctively put some funk in there.
That makes sense. It makes sense. It's probably the answer. Like I think that's the right answer. And people listening who are like, that means I have to listen to a lot of music. Yeah, it does.
I know.
So
I mean, the biggest thing that like characterize funk music is like the swing and the groove, and kind of like the gaps between the sounds and things like that. And, you know, like melodies and chord progressions kind of contribute to how funky it is. Writing in minor and, you know, just bouncy bass lines, not really sticking to one note, or, you know, like writing a song and you kind of like float around the one note say you're writing a song in E, you sort of like go up to the fifth and then come back to E like every phrase. And it's actually pretty repetitive funk music. But yeah, having a lot of gaps in your songs and that kind of thing can make it funky.
What do you mean by gaps though? Like what would that look like in practice? Because I think there's something to be said about like just using silence in your music, or you don't have to have a note everywhere.
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean. Like instead of just having like big long legato notes, stick to more like staccato notes, because if you listen to funk, it's like, you know, the bass slaps, you know, it's very staccato. There's not really long like brr kind of sounds. So that can contribute to the funkiness level of your song.
For sure. So coming back to, you know, your background and your journey, you were making music in Ableton. Today, you know, you're playing shows, putting out tutorials. What happened there? Like, how did you get to this point where you are now, other than a lot of hard work, I imagine?
I think the biggest thing that happened was just getting more and more into production. So like I said, I talked a little bit about putting acapellas on top of funk songs. Well, I started adding bigger and better drums to those funk songs. And then suddenly I've got funk drums and hip hop acapella. And then I started adding bass lines. And then like the video thing, I don't really know how that started. I guess I was just watching Mr. Bill's tutorials on YouTube, and I thought I could like do a couple of tutorials here and there. I wanted to show people how I did what I do. And I made a couple of videos. I didn't really like, it was just a hobby. It still really is just a hobby. Just do it whenever. But people seem to really like them. And then when I started to really give it a go, maybe 2 years ago, my subscriber count just kept increasing and increasing. And then companies like Ableton and Mixed in Key and these preset creators are all contacting me, asking me to promote their products and whatever. And I was like, what the hell? This is taking off. I was just making videos for fun.
What does your schedule look like? You know, on a given day, do you have strictly defined hours for production? Do you strive to put in a certain amount of time every day or week, or do you just do what you want?
Absolutely. I used to just kind of do whatever, whenever, just sleep when I'm tired and eat when I'm hungry and stuff like that. But you've really like, there was a turning point at a certain point, and I was like, this is my actual job. This is my actual career.
That's cool. I'm noticing that more and more with full-time producers, you know, like waking up, getting to the studio 8 or 9 and just doing the 8-hour thing. I think it's a good approach.
Yeah.
Because I've also talked to people who are like, oh yeah, like I wake up at 2 p.m. and then work till 2, and then it's just a cycle that goes on and on and on. I get so tired.
I probably would do that as well. The reason I would do that is so that on the weekends I'm not so tired, because you got to like stay up late and then play. Like, you know, I don't start DJing until like 1:30, and if I've been going to bed every night at 10 leading up to the weekend, then I'm just super tired.
The whole I'm not feeling it today thing, or creative block, do you believe it exists? And if so, do you get it?
Nah, I don't think it exists. I think there's like always something to do in the studio, even if you're not like writing the next hot banger. You know, you could be, you know, creating, like doing some sound design or tidying up your sample library, just organizing your projects so they're all named and categorized. Like this one's almost done, that one's finished, you know. Like there's just like maintenance work to be done. Like, you know, if you're a mechanic, if you're just fixing cars all day, then your tools are just going to be everywhere and there's oil all over the ground. You've got to like clean up at some point, you know? So on the days where I have no ideas, I find if I just end up like going through my samples and sorting things out, I'll be like, oh, I just found like a cool sample. Like, and then I'll suddenly get inspired, and then boom, I'm into like writing a song. Yeah. I don't think that there's this creative block kind of exists. And actually, like I saw a really cool TED talk, and I know like TED talks are kind of lame sometimes, but this one chick was saying that inspiration is like this ghost kind of thing that like enters your body and writes music through you when it decides to show up. And so if you're just at the desk in your studio at all times possible, then when this magical fucking inspirational ghost shows up, then you're there ready to go. But if you're like playing video games and the inspirational ghost shows up, then you can't really get creative in a video game. So you show up, you do your time, and then if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, at least you put in your time. Next day, let's go again.
I like that. There's always something you can do. You're like an Ableton whiz, watching your tutorials and so on. What are 2 to 3 Ableton techniques that most people don't know about?
I don't know. That's kind of a tricky question, to be honest. Usually if I think something's underutilized or not many people know about it, I do a YouTube video about it.
I did watch some of the 10 things wrong with your music, or 10 reasons why your song sucks.
10 reasons why your song really sucks. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said sidechaining.
Yeah.
Was the first one.
I just think like if you're a beginner, then excuse me. If you're a beginner, then you really need to learn how to use sidechain. It just helps so much with your mixdown. And when I first started producing, I wish I knew about sidechain. And actually I did kind of know about sidechain, but I didn't know how to use it right. So I just didn't use it, and I just would slap a limiter on the master and everything would just get smashed together. And you can really hear it in my music. Now the drums are so much more in your face in my songs, and like back in the day, they were kind of sitting in the background. Yeah, I just think more people need to learn and understand, the benefits of sidechain.
I like that. Anything else?
The other big thing that I always see beginners mess up, and just like even people that have been producing for ages, is they just don't know how to utilize the warping algorithms to their fullest potential. Things sound so much more clear when you use beats mode, because it's not actually doing any sort of destructive time stretching. It's literally just cutting the sample into chunks and then spreading those chunks apart or compressing those chunks together. And so you don't lose any quality. So, like if I'm writing a song and I'm doing a bootleg or a remix or something, I'll try and take a song and then speed it up so that when I do warp it using the beat markers, I'm not creating any gaps between the chunks. I'm compressing the chunks so that the chunks sort of overlap each other, and you just get the highest quality sound.
Because a lot of people just shoot straight for like complex.
Yeah. And that totally destroys the clarity and all the high end and stuff.
What do you say? It's like the lazy approach?
It's definitely the lazy approach. I'm sitting here like meticulously moving every single transient marker, and these other guys just drag a song in, click complex, and then they're like done. But it can sound so much better.
Yeah, no, I've noticed that. I mean, I'm definitely that guy who just will click complex. But to be honest, like I hardly ever use it at all. One other thing that, we talked about before we started recording was mastering, which I think as like, I don't know how this still happens, but a lot of beginners think that mastering is going to fix everything. They think that's what will make their music sound professional, which is obviously not true. Why do you think that kind of thinking exists for starters, and what should people do instead?
I think it's just like they have the definition of the word mastering wrong. They don't understand there's 2 steps to taking your song from the writing process to the completed process, or, a completed product, not the process. There's 2 steps. You write the song, then you mix down the song, and then you master it. And these dudes are just writing songs and then mastering them, and they're totally forgetting the mixdown process, which is probably the most important part of getting your song sounding good. A mastering engineer is not going to sidechain your drums to your bass line. A mastering engineer is not going to EQ your saxophone so that the lows don't clash with the bass line. You know, these are all things that you do in the mixdown process. Unless you're paying someone to do the mixdown for you, then don't be sending your song to a mastering engineer and expecting them to magically sidechain and EQ everything inside of this one WAV file that you send them. If you're sending a mastering engineer multiple stems, maybe they'll try and fix it a little bit, but honestly, it's up to you to learn how to mix down your songs. And a lot of the time, I'll mix down my songs and it sounds fantastic. And then mastering is just like slap a limiter on the master. Maybe a little EQ, you know, or sometimes I use a multi-band compression. And all the other work is done in the mixdown process. I remember, like, you know, some beginners saying to me like, oh, so-and-so's got this amazing mastering chain. What are you talking about? You mean he's got a limiter or an EQ? Like, you know, I just don't fucking get it.
People want a quick fix.
Yeah. They just want to pay someone to fix it.
I think the other thing is, like, if you sing your song, if you're a beginner and you don't know about this psychological thing or psychoacoustic, but you send your song to a mastering engineer and maybe it's like hitting at minus 6 dB. They send it back hitting at, you know, minus, well, 0. It's hitting the limit. It's going to sound way better because it's louder. I think people need to be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people need to fucking figure that shit out.
I've talked to artists, like big time artists, who some of them don't even really master. They'll do it themselves. They'll just chuck a limiter on, and then it's like they'll play it out. It's good enough to play out. Maybe for the commercial release, they get a mastering engineer, but it's not necessary. It's kind of just done because that's what's done. Not saying that that's the right approach, but
having a fresh pair of ears, like listen to it and be like, oh, there's way too much highs on this. Or I find like having someone else master your songs when you have a whole album or an EP, you want all the songs to sort of have the same amount of impact. And so like a mastering engineer can listen to all 5 of your songs or whatever and sort of get them to all sound sort of consistent. Also, having like you can be an amazing producer and write an amazing song and not know anything about mixing down and mastering. And you can go ahead and pay someone to mix down and master your songs if you're loaded with cash or whatever. But having at least a basic knowledge of how a mix down is done in your song can lead to more convenient decisions during the songwriting process that makes the mix down sound better.
What would be an example of that?
A perfect example is, say you've got like a house song, you're writing a house song and you got like kick drums going. If your songwriting decision is to put a bass line at the same time as every single kick, like a short staccato bass line, then the mastering engineer or the mixdown engineer is going to have a real hard time sort of making both the kick and the bass line shine in the mix. But if you make a small decision to offset the bass line from the kick drum, suddenly both sounds have their own little space in time and they can really punch much louder. You know, just small decisions like that can like affect your mix down in the end. So if you have knowledge of mixing down, what you need to do to get it to a point where it's playable and releasable, maybe you'll make some different decisions during the writing process.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah. I think that was one thing that took me way too long to learn. You know, if I stack this chord really high and if I use a lot of layers, I can't put anything else here.
Yeah.
So that's a decision. There's always trade-offs, you know, like if you do one thing, you can't do the other. So are there any other common mistakes that you see newer producers making?
If your song is going to be really long, make some different shit happen during the song. Don't just have it like the same loop all the way through, or now you bring in a hi-hat or something. You know, like put yourself in the position of the listener, and are you going to be holding that listener's attention span for the entire 12 minutes of your song? Like maybe it's a cool song. You can have cool songs that are 12 minutes long, but some cool stuff needs to happen. You can't just be riding the same drum loop all the way through, you know, riding that same bass line. Like, change the bass line. Me personally, that shit blows the hell out of me. You know, I need like a chord change or some cool different drums or different sounds. You know, keep it moving. I'm a producer too. I know how you made those sounds, so just surprise me with something different.
You have a tutorial on what makes a song catchy, and I watched it. I thought it was great. I watched it ages ago though, I think, when you put it up. Everyone listening to this should go and watch that. But Evan, can you summarize that video for us? What makes a song catchy?
It's been a while since I watched the video back myself, and it's kind of hard for me to remember what I said. But I think the main idea was to sort of have sort of a revolution in your like chord structure, you know, where the last chord of your phrase leads nicely into the first chord. And maybe your first chord isn't the root note, you know, the root note's somewhere in the middle, and it all just kind of like revolves and carries on and things like that. A lot of pop artists are like writing their vocals, the melodies for their vocals, higher up on the scale. So say you're writing a song in C minor, they will write their vocal melody in G major, I think, because G major is kind of like has a lot of the same notes as C minor, but it's a fifth up. So when you hear like pop songs and they've got that on top, it's always like a fifth up from the root note. And I think that's like a trending sort of thing right now, but I think that kind of makes your song catchy if you want to write pop music that sounds like shit anyway. But, you know, like, that's one thing to think about. Don't like, if, you know, your vocals are the same pitch as your root note, it's a little bit boring. So they're just trying to spice it up a bit, I suppose.
I've got 2 more questions and then we'll wrap up. How important is music theory, in your opinion?
I think it's pretty important. It's extremely important, actually. You know, you've got to be able to speak the language of music if you want to be able to tell a story with your song. Like, you can get by not knowing too much musical theory, but you're going to sound like a tourist with a phrase book. Like, oh, hello, excuse me. You know, you're going to sound like a little bit like your English is a little bit broken. If you can fluently speak in the language of music, then, you know, you can tell a much more detailed, intricate story with your song. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm at all fluent in music theory. I really try my best. I got a friend who comes over a lot, and he's like amazing on the guitar, and he's been helping me with some of my newer songs that haven't been released yet, with the chord progressions and stuff. And he's really opening my eyes to how shit I am at music theory.
It's a never-ending journey, though. Like, there's so much to learn.
There's a lot to learn, and it's kind of like boring to learn as well, because you just want to, when you hear something that sounds good, you should be asking, why does that sound good? And sometimes the answer isn't always clear unless you have like a very, very fluent knowledge in musical theory. But I try to analyze other songs and figure out why that chord progression works so well, why it feels so nice or feels so jazzy, or why does that chord sound like a question and then there's an answer afterwards, kind of thing. So I try and brush up on my musical theory, but I really wish that I learned more musical theory when I was younger.
Okay, one more question. You're walking down the street, getting a coffee, you drink coffee, anything, whatever. You're just walking down the street, and a UFO comes down and these aliens pop out, super ugly. And they say that they're going to abduct you, but they leave you, they give you a piece of paper and a pen. And they say you can write 3 pieces of advice to leave behind for the world. Doesn't have to be production related. What's on that piece of paper?
Oh man, that's a tricky question. Doesn't have to be music production related. It'd be easier if it had to be music production related. I guess like one kind of mantra I have is like, don't be so money driven, you know, like time is worth more than money. That's one thing that I always find myself saying to myself. I have so much time to just experiment on music or do whatever I like, really. And I feel blessed for that. And I think I see my friends who have like full-time jobs and they just living for the weekend. And I really don't want to live my life like that. I really want to just have a lot of time to do things that I enjoy, you know? And so, yeah, I guess I'd write time is worth more than money. Yeah, I think the other piece of advice I'd put on there production-wise would be not sit down and write a song every time. 90% of your time should be spent not writing a song. You should be doing things like understanding how your synthesizer works, you know, tidying up your files, doing small things like today I'm going to write drums, just cool drums. Today I'm going to write just cool chord progressions. Today I'm going to figure out a cool chord progression. And I just bought a new synthesizer and I'm going to read the manual, you know, things like that 90% of the time. And then 10% of the time, once you've built up all this knowledge and collections, you know, putting away these drums and stuff that you've been making, then you sit down and write a song. The reason I think that's the way to go is because when you're writing a song, I think momentum is really, really important. Writing a song is like, I don't know, like a train going up a hill. It's like a struggle at the start. You got this empty project and you're like climbing this hill, and then you just reach this point where you're at the top of the hill and you're like, you've got everything there ready to go, and you just know that you can make this into a full song. And that's the downhill part.
I like that. That's an awesome approach. Evan, thanks heaps for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you, listen to your music and so forth?
Just search Slynk. I'm on everything like SoundCloud. You can listen to all my music on SoundCloud. You can listen to all my music on Spotify. You can listen to all my music on YouTube. And you can watch all my Ableton tutorials on YouTube as well. And I also got some merch for sale sometimes if you go to my Bandcamp. And actually, pretty cool. I got this thing on my Bandcamp where if you give me $20 every year, you get every song that I have ever released in the past, and then every song that I will release in the future.